A fisherman saw someone standing still on water and not moving at all. This terrifying tale will haunt your dreams. We've scoured the internet to bring you 4 terrifying tales of fishing trips gone wrong. Don't miss a single word. Follow along with us. Our first story takes us to the rugged coastline of the Pacific Northwest. A lone fisherman named Mark set out for a day of solitude and salmon. The morning started like any other, the gentle rocking of the boat, the calls of gulls overhead, the sun just peeking over the horizon. Mark steered his small boat towards his usual spot, a secluded cove known for its abundance of fish. He cast his line, settling in for a peaceful morning. Hours passed, the sun climbed higher, and still, Mark hadn't had a single bite. It was unusual. This particular spot was rarely this quiet. A strange unease began to creep in, replacing the tranquility of the morning. Mark scanned the water, looking for any sign of life, any movement other than the gentle sway of the waves. That's when he saw it. On the distant shoreline, partially obscured by the morning mist, stood a figure. Mark couldn't make out any details, just a dark silhouette against the backdrop of the trees. He tried to dismiss it as a hiker, maybe another fisherman seeking a quiet spot. But something about the way the figure stood, unmoving, sent a shiver down his spine. Mark tried to focus on fishing, telling himself it was nothing. But every few minutes his eyes were drawn back to the shore. The figure remained, an unsettling sentinel in the morning stillness. It never moved, never waved, never acknowledged Mark's presence in any way. The unease intensified, twisting into something close to dread. Mark decided to move, to try his luck further down the coast. As he started his engine, his gaze lingered on the figure for a moment too long. The figure, still shrouded in shadow, appeared to turn its head. Mark couldn't be sure. The distance was too great, but in that instant, he felt a chill run straight through him. He didn't waste any time, speeding away from the cove, his eyes darting between the shoreline and the open water. He never returned to that secluded cove, the memory of that silent, watchful figure forever tainting the once peaceful waters. Our next tale takes us to the murky depths of the Mississippi River. A seasoned fisherman, a man known for his skill and his silence, set out one humid night in search of catfish. His name is Caleb. Caleb knew the river like the back of his hand, its secrets, its rhythms, its moods. He preferred the cover of darkness, when the catfish were most active, and the river whispered its tales undisturbed. He anchored his boat in his usual spot, a deep channel where the river ran dark and silent. The only sounds were the chirping of crickets and the occasional splash of a fish breaking the surface. He cast his line, the heavy weight sinking into the inky water. The night wore on, the moon a pale disk in the hazy sky. Caleb felt the familiar tug on his line, a welcome distraction from the oppressive heat. He reeled it in, expecting a hefty catfish. But as the line neared the surface, the water around it began to churn violently. Caleb strained, his muscles tensed, pulling against a weight far greater than any catfish he'd encountered before. The boat rocked precariously as whatever was on the end of his line fought desperately to break free. Through the murky water, he glimpsed something pale and enormous, something that sent a jolt of primal fear through his veins. It was not a fish. It was a hand, a human hand, grotesquely swollen, its skin slick and pale. Caleb's blood ran cold. He dropped the rod as if it burned him, the line snapping back into the dark water with a sickening thwap. The hand, still tethered to the line, vanished back into the depths, taking with it whatever creature it belonged to. Caleb sat paralyzed, his heart pounding in his chest. The silence of the river, once comforting, now felt heavy with menace. He could feel eyes on him, watching from the depths. He knew, with a certainty that chilled him to his core, that he had hooked something ancient and malevolent. He cut the engine, letting the current carry him downstream, away from the spot where he had made his horrifying catch. He didn't speak of the incident, not to anyone. But the river held a different kind of silence for him now, a silence that whispered of unseen things and horrors best left undisturbed. Caleb continued to fish, but he never again fished at night, and he never again used bait that might attract the attention of whatever lurked in the deepest, darkest parts of the river. Imagine yourself on a vast lake, the stars your only companions, the gentle lapping of water against your boat, the only sound. Our next story takes us to a place like this, a place of serene beauty that belies a chilling secret. Two friends, let's call them Jake and Emily, decided to spend a night fishing on a remote lake, hoping to catch a glimpse of the legendary lake trout that were said to inhabit its depths. They arrived at dusk, setting up camp on a small wooded island in the middle of the lake. The air was cool and crisp, the sky ablaze with stars. As the sun dipped below the horizon, they cast their lines, settling in for a night of fishing and storytelling. Hours passed, the fire crackled, and still the lake remained stubbornly quiet. They laughed, they talked, they shared stories, their voices the only sound that broke the stillness of the night. As the fire began to die down and fatigue set in, they decided to turn in for the night, their hopes of catching a glimpse of the elusive trout fading with the embers. Jake retreated to his tent, while Emily wrapped herself in a blanket, choosing to sleep under the open sky. The last thing Jake remembered before drifting off to sleep was the sound of Emily's soft humming and the gentle lapping of the water against the shore. He woke abruptly in the dead of night, his heart pounding in his chest. Something felt wrong. The air had grown heavy, the silence oppressive. He could hear a faint sound like someone whispering, coming from the direction of the lake. He unzipped his tent and stepped out, his eyes scanning the darkness. The fire had died down to embers, casting long, dancing shadows across the campsite. And then he saw her. Emily was sitting on the edge of the dock, her back to him, her head tilted as if she were listening intently to something. "Em?" he called out, his voice a raspy whisper in the stillness. She didn't respond. He called her name again, louder this time, a note of urgency creeping into his voice. She remained motionless, her long hair obscuring her face. He walked towards her, his unease growing with every step. "Em, are you okay?" he asked, his hand reaching out to touch her shoulder. She turned, and in that instant the blood ran cold in his veins. Her eyes were wide, unblinking, filled with a terror he had never seen before. Her lips moved, but no words came out. It was then that he heard it. A voice, low and guttural, seemed to emanate from the water beneath the dock, whispering Emily's name. The voice was ancient, filled with a malice that chilled him to the bone. Emily screamed, a high-pitched, terrified sound that echoed across the still water. Jake grabbed her hand, pulling her away from the edge of the dock, away from the whispering darkness that seemed to reach up from the depths. They didn't speak, didn't waste time packing up their things. They ran back to their boat, their fear propelling them through the darkness, the whispers from the depths echoing in their ears. They didn't look back, didn't speak until they were safely back on shore, the first light of dawn painting the sky a pale pink. They left their fishing gear behind, a small price to pay for their escape from the lake and its unseen horrors. The lake, once a place of tranquility, now held a sinister edge in their memories. The whispers from the depths, the look of pure terror in Emily's eyes, remained, a chilling reminder that some secrets are best left buried in the dark, silent places of the world. Our final story takes us to the open ocean, a vast and unforgiving expanse that has claimed countless souls. It's a story that begins with a routine fishing trip and ends with a chilling mystery. A man, we'll call him Daniel, an experienced sailor and avid fisherman, set off on his annual solo fishing expedition. He loved the solitude of the sea, the challenge of battling the elements, and reeling in the ocean's bounty. He'd meticulously planned his route, charting a course through a known fishing hotspot, a place teeming with tuna and marlin. He equipped his boat, a sturdy vessel named the Wanderer, with all the latest technology: GPS, radar, satellite phone, ensuring he could stay connected and navigate safely. He kissed his wife goodbye, promising to call her as soon as he had cell service again, and set sail under a sky full of promise. Days turned into weeks, and Daniel's catches filled the wanderer's hold. He dutifully called his wife every evening, his voice crackling with static but filled with the joy of a successful trip. One day, the call stopped. His wife, initially unconcerned, brushed it off as a signal issue, a common occurrence in the vast expanse of the ocean. But as days turned into a week, her worry morphed into dread. She contacted the Coast Guard, her voice trembling with fear. They launched a search and rescue operation, combing the area where Daniel had last made contact. They found the Wanderer adrift, its engine silent, its deck strangely undisturbed. There were no signs of a struggle, no indication of what might have happened to Daniel. The Coast Guard boarded the vessel, their hope of finding Daniel alive fading with every passing moment. They found his belongings neatly stowed, his fishing gear in place, everything seemingly in order. It was as if he had vanished into thin air. Then they discovered his phone. It was still recording, capturing the last few terrifying hours of Daniel's journey. The recording began normally, the sound of wind and waves, the occasional call of a seabird. Then a new sound emerged from the background, a low, haunting hum that seemed to vibrate through the very hull of the boat. The hum grew louder, more insistent, and Daniel's voice, usually calm and steady, took on an edge of fear. "What is that?" he could be heard muttering, his voice barely audible above the now deafening hum. The recording went silent for a moment, then captured the sound of something heavy being dragged across the deck, followed by a chilling, guttural roar. The phone tumbled, capturing only the sounds of chaos and Daniel's panicked shouts. Then, silence. The Coast Guard listened to the recording, their faces grim, their eyes reflecting the horror contained within those final, terrifying moments. The search for Daniel was called off after a week, his disappearance chalked up to an unexplained maritime tragedy. The recording from his phone, however, remained, a chilling testament to the unseen forces that lurk beneath the waves, a haunting reminder that even in this age of technology and exploration, the ocean remains a vast and unforgiving wilderness. Out there, in the silence, beneath the waves, something waits. We cast our lines, seeking solace, seeking adventure, seeking the thrill of the catch. But sometimes we catch a glimpse of something else, something ancient, something hungry, something that reminds us that we are just visitors in this world. We build our boats, our technology, our walls, but the truth is, we are never truly safe. Not when the water whispers, not when the shadows lengthen, not when the silence is broken by a sound we don't recognize. So the next time you find yourself drawn to the water's edge, remember these stories. Remember the unseen depths, the things that watch and wait. Remember that the most terrifying monsters are often the ones we cannot see. And be careful what you fish for, because you never know what might be lurking on the other end of the line. Subscribe our channel for more chilling tales like these. Stay tuned and share your stories. Your stories might be our next video title. Stay spooky and check all the doors.